Welcome to CEC online lecture. Students, in this session we shall learn about the second stage of personal selling, that is pre-approach and approach. Now, even when the salesperson has a list of potential prospects to call, it might be wise for him to consider few additional steps so that his efforts turn out to be successful. One of the biggest problems that salespeople face is the initial call reluctance. This is a kind of a stage fright that might be experienced by those salespeople who have been into this profession for quite some time, as well as by the new salespeople. Now, this kind of a reluctance can persist irrespective of what they sell, how they have been trained, what kind of product they are selling, or the company's performance. This can, students, be more understood as a kind of a psychological symptom and sales call anxiety that can be attributed to reasons like negative evaluation of oneself and imagined negative evaluation from the customer. Some of this reluctance can be overcome through some preparation, which involves like discussing and reenacting the sales call with your colleagues and with your peer group, using supportive role playing, making initial prospect contact with a partner for support, shifting the focus from individual prospect personalities to the objective of sales, rehearsing your sales call a number of times, or probably just observing and emulating the behavior of successful salespeople. All in all, students, we can infer that making sales call on customers, especially the first time calls, require some sort of pre-preparation. Planning the sales call approach often therefore is referred to as pre-approach. That is the stage where your sales manager have to undertake some sort of a planning and therefore is regarded as much more important than the approach itself. Now, this planning for the sales call is essential when the decision involving the consumer is largely complex in nature, or you are dealing with a product as a salesman which is of high involvement product category. Now we shall discuss about the importance of planning the sales call in little more detail. The first thing that your planning provides you is the framework. So we find that pre-approach planning gives the salespeople an overall framework for negotiating and decision making, not only before the sales call but during and after the sales call as well. The second way in which it turns out to be important is that it helps the salespeople in establishing the clear sales call objectives. Now, planning the sales call help you in determining these objectives, which can actually range from introduction of the product to gathering more information or maybe winning a large order. Now, clear determination of these objectives provide salesman with not only a framework but also direction and focus. Without this, what is going to happen? The sales representatives will remain unfocused in their interaction with the customers or the prospects. So we can say that in a way, clear-cut objectives would help the salesperson to assess the effectiveness of their interaction with the prospects. Now, some of these objectives can be the broad overall objectives like generating the sales or developing the market or protecting the market. Whereas when we are talking about the specific sales objective, then they can relate to what we can call as SMART attributes. Like the objectives should have the attributes as being specific, being measurable, achievable, relational, that is it should help you in the relationship building with the prospects, and they should be temporal, like they should be adhered to within a specified time frame. Now, once you have set the objective, another aspect in which probably your whole process of pre-approach is going to help you is it helps the salesman in preparing for the customer reaction. So by planning the sales call, salespeople prepare themselves for the possible responses and reactions, and then the salespeople can collect necessary information before actually meeting the prospect. This not only is going to add to his or her credibility, but is also going to enhance the effectiveness of subsequent buyer-seller interactions. Another aspect where we can find pre-approach to be really useful is that it helps in enhancing the self-confidence and professionalism. So a well-prepared salesperson is usually the most confident one. He approaches the person then with a professional and successful manner. So careful planning and repeated practice helps in building that kind of a confidence in the salesman. And not only it is going to build a confidence in you, but it is also going to enhance the salesperson's overall confidence in the product, in the organization, so as making him much more responsive towards the sales negotiations. Now, students, it is also important for us to understand that prospects see such salespeople as much more organized in their approach in comparison to ones who are not prepared and so may not have an understanding of the prospect's needs and his perspectives. Another way in which your pre-approach helps you is it helps the salespeople in avoiding the errors. Now, when they gather the prospect information ahead of the sales call, what you are doing is the salespeople are reducing their chances of making errors in front of the prospect when they actually get to meet them in the approach stage. So a salesperson having the requisite knowledge is unlikely to say or unlikely to do something that is going to annoy or probably upset the prospect. Now, having learned the importance of pre-approach, students, let us understand the steps of pre-approach. Now, although the planning and the preparation step may differ for initial sales call and the subsequent sales call, but these are the 7, we can say, basic steps which lead to the pre-approach success. Now, what are these steps? As is being indicated in this figure, the first stage or the first step deals with preparing the prospect. Then you sell the sales call appointment. Third, you gather and analyze the information. You identify the prospect's problems and needs. You identify the product features and benefits. Choose an appropriate presentation strategy and then rehearse your approach a number of times. Now let us discuss a little more about each one of these stages. Now the first stage, as I said, relates with preparing the prospect. So as a first step, what we are going to ensure, a salesman has to prepare and warm up the prospect for the initial sales call. Now one such approach is seeding. What do you mean by seeding? Seeding means that you are going to indulge in prospect focused activities like mailing the relevant news articles that are carried out well in advance of the sales call, which is one way of preparing the prospects. Now what such activities do? Such activities help you in creating a relationship and also in improving the probability of positive reception of the initial sales call by the prospect. In the second stage, what the salesman can do, the salesman can sell the sales call appointment to the prospect. Now, as no prospect would like to waste his or her time, the salesperson has to develop a persuasive strategy to sell the sales call appointment. Now, here the purpose is to stimulate the prospect interest before making a face-to-face sales call. One way in which you can do is to pre-notify the prospects either through phone or through letter or through an email, okay, and then the customers would feel obliged to accept a sales call that has been announced in advance. Also, pre-notification makes the sales people seem much more professional in comparison to those who show up just unexpectedly at the prospect's doorstep. So obviously nobody is going to appreciate this kind of a approach. Instead of that, if you sell a sales call appointment in advance, a prospect is going to appreciate it. The third step is to gather and analyze the information about the prospect. Now, students, although some basic information about the prospect is gathered in the prospecting stage itself. The salesperson in this stage has to make efforts to gather some in-depth information. Why? So as to effectively handle both the routine as well as the unanticipated situations of the sales call. Now you can maintain a structured form to keep an up-to-date information pertaining to each of the prospects. Any additional and relevant information that you find that can be possibly useful, turn out to be useful at the time of sales call, it should be separately noted under heads like say insights or special remarks or some comments. However, just collecting the pre-approach information is just not sufficient. The information should also be assessed for its accuracy and also should be interpreted with caution. Acting on the basis of the information which is misinterpreting in nature or is inaccurate information can only result in losses for the company in terms of loss of sales and even the loss of the customer. Now, when you talk about what all information one can go for, it may include your job title or the duties of the prospect, the superior, the education, work experience, buying behavior, personality type, after work activities, some hobbies, interest, and who is the purchasing authority, what is your level of technical experience, the size of the prospect's family, age of family members. So all these fine-tuning details actually help you to get to know your prospects better. In the fourth stage, the salesperson has to identify the prospect's problems and needs. Now, though it is not easy to know the prospect's specific needs prior to a sales call, careful analysis of the information gathered can help the salesperson in getting a general sense of the prospect needs. Now, some salesperson use spin technique, and I'm going to elaborate about it in a little while. So this is a technique which helps the salesperson to do a kind of a need assessment so as to identify how the prospect or how the firm is going to benefit from purchasing a particular product or a particular service. Now, what is the spins? In SPIN, this is an acronym where S stands for situation, P stands for problem, I stands for implications, and N stands for need payoff. Now, by situation, we mean you have to learn about the specific environment in which the product would be used by the prospect. So, what is the context or what is probably the situation that he is facing? Problem is the specific assessment of the difficulties for which the salesperson know that his product is going to provide a solution to the prospect. Need payoff is the solution, and implication is the consequences of the prospects using the current competitive product. So once you assess all these four things, that is the situation, problem, implications, and the need payoff, you can have a fair good idea as to what kind of needs and what kind of requirements the prospect might be having, therefore leading to the next stage of the pre-call, which is identifying the product features or the advantages or the benefits which are going to help the prospect in taking care of the needs and the problems that you have identified in the previous stage. So in this stage, what you are going to do, you are going to look for those features or advantages or the benefits that your product would provide, and therefore this is a product that can possibly be considered by the prospect. So doing so is going to help the salesperson is in crafting an appropriate demonstration strategy also in future and design your presentation according to the same. In the next stage, students, it is important for the salesperson to choose a presentation strategy. So here he would choose the best presentation approach for the prospect. Though one can choose from say number of presentation styles, due consideration has to be given to two aspects. One, that the salesperson should adopt a customer oriented approach and make an active effort to identify and solve the customer problems. And the second important aspect here is to consider that in order to be successful, a salesperson has to learn to adapt his communication style in accordance to the prospects. Now we move on to the next step, which is rehearsing. So, it is often said that practice makes a man perfect. So is true with the salespeople as well. So when they rehearse their approach again and again and master the skills of making an effective sales presentation, they are going to naturally feel comfortable about the whole situation and they are going to turn more confident about it. Now, this does not imply that you have to memorize the entire script, but you have to emphasize on keeping in mind certain key points that you have to emphasize on at various stages of the selling process. So rehearsing becomes especially important for the sales people while they are approaching a new customer. Now, after doing the entire planning, obviously the salesperson is going to move from the pre-approach to approach. Now this becomes the stage where you are going to finally come face to face with the prospect. Now most selling situations require that actual approach should be well planned. Again, face to face meeting with the prospect has to be carefully crafted, and most prospects, they are still most impressed and they are most persuaded with a person who has done this kind of a in-depth study and would afterwards meet or give an in-person visit to the prospect. So approach, we can say, is the first minute or so of the entire sale process. It frequently makes or breaks the entire presentation. So if your approach fails, the salesperson should understand that he is not going to get any chance of making the presentation. So even the trainee sales people should be informed that a good approach is going to really help them. Especially it is going to help them with three broad things. One, it is going to help you in getting the prospect's attention. It is going to immediately inspire interest in say hearing more about the proposition that you have to make. And lastly, it is going to make it very easy, that entire process of transition into the presentation. Now again, we have to keep in consideration certain prerequisites of an effective approach. One, students, a salesperson has to dress up for the role, because this is the first contact with the prospect, and therefore this is very important in terms of forming the right impression. Now this right impression is to be formed, you can say, just within seconds that you meet the customers or the prospects. And to begin with, you have to dress up for the role. Now what does this mean? This means that you have to dress up appropriately because you have to form the impression. Also, at the same time, you have to ensure that you take all steps in order to create a favorable first impression. So dressing up smartly, having a professional look and attire around you is certainly going to help. Second thing that is very general and again is going to come very handy is the way you greet the prospect. So the first few minutes of meeting with the prospect are important in terms of leaving again an impact. So the salesperson has to should know how to greet the buyer, how to actually kickstart overall conversation, and how to take it forward. Now this can set the tone for the entire sales call and may also affect the long-term relationship with the prospect. The mood and the psychological state of the salesperson can really have an impact on the overall outcome of the sales call. So it is very important to approach the prospect with optimism. Your negative thinking at that point of time will only result in a negative behavior, and then the adverse result are going to follow. So in order to avoid that, it is usually helpful if the salespeople maintain a comfortable, erect posture, they are calm, they have a positive attitude about whole thing, and they greet the customer with a smiling face or probably a friendly handshake, because these kind of body gestures are going to signal a good start and are usually an appropriate way of greeting the prospects. The third thing that you have to keep in mind, or the salespeople have to keep in mind, is that you have to generate attention and interest from the very beginning. So you have to hold on to the prospect's attention and interest, especially because you know that due to time constraints, a prospect need to be convinced that the meeting is going to be worth the effort and would offer them significant benefits. So as a starting point, students, the salesperson should identify the area on which his product can be clearly differentiated from that of the competitors' offerings, and depending on the entire selling situation, then the salesperson can use an appropriate method of approaching, which can be adopted to deal and converse with the prospects. So here we come at the last leg of the session, where we are now going to talk about the different strategies which can be used by the salesperson in order to approach. These can also be termed as approach strategies. Now these are, say, 4 or 5 basic strategies which a salesperson can follow. The first strategy is the introductory approach. Now, as it is clear from the name, this is something very informal. So what is going to happen in this stage? The salesperson can introduce himself to the prospect. He can state everything about the company that he represents. He can state about the product. So though this is more frequently used approach, one would also find that this tends to be little weak. And why this is weak? Because this helps you very little in furthering the sale. As I said, that this is just the introductory approach, and therefore this has to be built up with some other approach immediately after the introduction. So all in all, this alone is not going to work much. The second approach that can be used, or you can say another approach that can be used, is the product approach, which consists of handling the product to the prospect. Now here you do not actually indulge in any sort of conversation. There is very little, or in fact no conversation. Why? Because you just want the prospect to handle the product and feel it. Now this turns out to be very effective when the product is unique and it creates an interest in the product on site. So say for instance, you are talking about costume jewelry, and therefore just by looking at the jewelry and handling it, and probably like say looking at it, one can feel more interested in knowing about it. So here you let the prospect absorb and have that kind of an experience of handling the product, know a little more about the product by looking and handling it. Another approach is the consumer benefit approach. So as is clear from the name, now you have to start the sale by informing the prospect of what the product and the firm as a whole can provide in terms of the benefits. Then you asked the prospect if he would be interested in claiming those kind of benefits or availing those kind of benefits. Like probably you can ask the prospect as to what kind of benefits having a insurance plan or a steady cash flow every month is going to provide you, especially in the years when you retire from your services. So this kind of benefit by investing is in a product, how the product can benefit you at a later stage in certain kind of a situation. This kind of a benefit approach, students immediately have a connect with the consumer, because he is able to learn and he is able to appreciate as to how the use and the consumption of the product is really going to be advantageous for him. Another method that can be adopted is shock approach. Yes, it does sound very an approach which shocks the customer, and this is what exactly is the purpose. So in this approach, what the salesman does, he highlights the risks that are involved. Now why you are doing so, and why do you leave the person in a state of shock, so to say, because that particular situation then would force the prospect to think about that particular product or service. For example, the salesperson may talk about the number of say rising threats in a particular area, so that the prospect would then be compelled to think about buying a product like an insurance policy, or probably buying a product like a safety equipment for the house. So this approach is effective in getting the attention of the prospect, who is not going to pay attention to you otherwise, right? He is not going to emotionally invest in that particular product, or he is not going to take that particular conversation very seriously unless and until you talk about a fearful situation which renders him in a state of shock, and therefore would compel him to think about that particular product or service and its use and consumption in that kind of a situation. Another approach which is often found useful by the salespeople is to adopt a referral approach. Now we have seen that this also turns out to be a very effective lead generating process, right? So what you do is you connect with some people who are going to give you the referrals. So this is successful in getting an audience with the prospect. It consists of obtaining usually the permission of a past or a present satisfied consumer, and using his name as a reference while you are meeting a new prospect. So a satisfied customer or product or a service usually also is willing enough to write a short note to a friend who is a prospect, introducing the sales representative and talking about the product that he also has used sometime in the recent past. So what happens through this kind of an approach, the prospect has an immediate bond of friendship with the seller, and out of courtesy to the friend, he is going to listen out to or hear out to what the sales representative has to say. So all in all, by using this kind of an approach, you would get the attention and interest of the potential customer or the prospect. So now again, students, the salesperson can use either one of these approaches, or he can also use a combination approach. Like I said, that you can start off with an introductory approach and then can use a referral one, or an introductory with a benefit approach, or a product and a benefit approach taken together. Now again, no one approach is going to fit every situation, and the choice would have to be made depending on who you are going to deal with, what kind of prospect and what kind of temperament he or she has, so that you can align your entire approach strategy to that of the prospect, so that you are going to get much more success in handling that particular prospect post this stage. And you are going to really feel, or you can say the salesperson is going to really find himself very smoothly transitioning from approach stage to the next stage, which is the presentation stage. So I'm sure students, at the end of this session, you would have gained an understanding about the pre-approach and the approach stage of the selling process, which often are the setting stone for the subsequent stages of the selling process. So students, in the next session, we would be learning about the third stage of the selling process. Till then, be safe and take very good care of yourself. Thank you for your patient hearing.